Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life. Not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at facebook.com/virtual memories show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and tunein.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for us. Maybe that'll inspire Apple to promote us a little. And, as always, you can promote us by telling people about the podcast on social media or however else you publicize the things you like. You can support the Virtual Memories Show and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/vmspod and set up your level of support. You'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/vmspod or paypal.me/vmspod and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. All right, it's been a tough week, but I'm here with another podcast. My old man's health is still rough, and that's been tough on him and his old lady, and by extension, me. Never having had lots of family around, I haven't had to go through this sort of thing, and don't really have an extended family to help carry the load. And since I don't share anything real about my life on social media, I don't have that virtual network of people to offer their virtual support. So it's a good thing I had the podcast, right? I mean, the conversations I get to have, the pals I've made through this, it's all really important to me. And in fact, I took a break from all that stuff on Saturday to hang out with a past guest at the East Coast Comic Con. Not the sort of comics festival I go to. This is more superheroes and cosplay than the indie art world that I kind of work around. But Howard Chaykin was coming in from California as a guest, so I paid for a day pass, drove down to the Meadowlands, and hung out with Howard and shot the breeze with him and a couple of other people for a few hours. It was a nice way to get out of myself for a bit. Which brings us to this week's episode. My guest this time around was also at East Coast Comic Con. His name is JJ Settlemyer. He's a director, producer, and president of JJ Settlemyer Productions. JJ's company makes animation for ads and TV shows and, well, a lot of stuff that I'll tell you about in his bio. And we've got a ton of mutual pals who've been telling me for a while, you need to do a podcast with JJ. Now, at Mocha Festival, one of those more arts rather than superhero comics events that I mentioned, was in New York a couple of weeks ago, and JJ attended the live panel that I did with Roz Chast, and that one should air next week. And he came up after me after the panel to tell me how much he enjoyed the conversation. The problem was he didn't introduce himself, and I had no idea what JJ Settlemyer looked like. So I thought, okay, tall guy, interesting mustache, like the panel, cool. Then he wrote that evening to introduce himself, and he explained that he was that guy who liked the panel. See, our mutual pal, one of my past guests, Joe Chardello, tried to connect us during Mocha, and I'm not sure if that's why JJ went to the Roz Chast panel or if he was going to go there anyway, but either way, once JJ and I started trading names of his pals and my past guests, like Joe and M.K. Brown and R.O. Bleckman and Barry Blitt and on, we were pretty much on a collision course to record this show. So we met up the following weekend at a studio in White Plains, New York, spent the afternoon recording, shooting the breeze, having a strawberry rhubarb pie that I picked up on the way there, and otherwise just having a really good time. In fact, the conversation you're about to hear does not include the first 30 minutes or so after I turned the recorder on, when we were just riffing away, comparing notes about mutual acquaintances, and just sort of fallen into that like instant shorthand that I hope means that we're friends. You guys know I have tremendously low self-esteem, so I don't want to presume anything. But JJ and I really, enjoyed the time together, talked for another hour or two after we finished up, all sorts of ideas for upcoming shows. He's got various people he'd love to connect me with or record. Anyway, it was... I'm just really glad that we got to meet. I'm glad Joe connected us. I'm glad MK Brown mentioned him to me way back as somebody I need to know. So that's the sort of thing that helps me get through some of the tougher stuff that I'm dealing with. Anyway, caveat. There are two of them. One, it was a beautiful day in White Plains, New York that Sunday, so we recorded with the doors and windows of his office open. That means there's some outside noise like cars, police sirens, church bells, stuff like that. Also, my allergies were kind of rough, so I cough a couple of times. I couldn't really take those out of the mix because of where they occur when he was talking. Now, here's JJ's bio. JJ Settlemyer is the president and director of JJ Settlemyer Productions Incorporated, an animation and design studio that he established with his wife Patrice in 1990. It has created and produced some of the most influential broadcast productions in the past quarter century. MTV's Beavis and Butthead, NBC Saturday Night Live's Saturday TV Funhouse cartoon series, including the ambiguously gay duo, Cartoon Network Adult Swim's Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, Stephen Colbert's Tech Jansen, all had their beginnings at JJSP. In addition to TV network cartoon series, the White Plains, New York studio has produced more than 500 animated commercial films and won more than 700 prestigious awards with screenings in more than 100 festivals in 25 different countries. JJ is an experienced educator, curator of exhibits on animation and design, and an architectural preservationist with 2 structures on the National Register of Historic Preservation. He is a regular editor-author for Print Magazine's Imprint Design blog. He is also a regular presenter at Comic-Cons throughout the USA and the subject of numerous interviews on TV and radio. JJ's interests are wide and varied. If you Google him, you'll become very confused. He likes that. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with JJ Settlemyer, which I'll spell after we finish up. Let's start off. We'll start with something relatively easy. The tightrope between art and commerce. How do you manage that?
There's nothing really to manage. I grew up with 2 parents, divorced, that had completely different sensibilities. And but they were both involved in advertising. Mm-hmm. So I grew up just knowing what advertising was about, did not have any intention whatsoever of getting involved in it. Wanted to do comic books as a kid. Decided I was either going to go to New York for doing comic books or California for animation. And then moved here because I also had family here and had been to New York many times as a kid, very familiar with it, felt comfortable here. And it wasn't until after I got here and found that comic books in the late 70s was like this lethal kind of in the United States. Didn't draw any level of specialness to stand out and didn't have my own characters. And I kind of went into a funk, but then met my future wife, Patrice, who kind of goosed me and poked me, started taking my portfolio around to anyone who would look at it. And I found animation, and that's where I settled for a while. And then I think naturally just kind of segued into the animation industry aspect of it because that was so much a part of what animation was about in New York. Felt comfortable. And this idea of being able to do something that you really enjoy doing, it's never the same. Each project is different. And you can make a good living at it. There have only been a few times maybe when Patrice and I, after opening the studio, confronted projects that we maybe if it had something to do with tobacco, we wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. But we haven't, and maybe some level of taste things, some of the SNL stuff early on, we were just like, nah, I don't think we can do this. But in terms of art and commerce, I don't have any bad feelings about any of the things we've done, or I'm compromising anything, and our work is good, and we use animation for good instead of evil. So this exploration of trying to find ways of doing animation by working with designers, illustrators, cartoonists, whatever.
Yeah. Use your common terminology.
Yes, exactly. To that translation process, which again is different every time, is a real fun process. So the art and commerce thing.
False dichotomy?
Yeah.
Did it help having parents who were in advertising, or was there a degree to which they said, oh my God, son, you do not want to do this? Or did they try and warn you off? Okay.
Everything was so, well, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. Initially, when I moved to New York and started indicating to my dad that I was going to possibly look for work in advertising, he wasn't encouraging with that. Mm-hmm. But that it was such a little vignette. It wasn't, he just wanted to make sure I was going to be doing something that I like to do, that I was going to be, not, going into the same kind of corporate oppressive, thing. I mean, as a kid, a young kid, we'd be driving down the street in Chicago and there'd be like a homeless person in the garbage, and he'd say, and I'm like maybe 10, and he'd say, see that guy over there? I said, yeah, he was an art director last week at J. Walter Thompson, which was a gag, but I grew up, that was the kind of thing, there are no guarantees with that kind of stuff. So, and my father, the one thing I didn't want to do is I didn't want to go into an industry where I was going to be compared to my dad, because my dad did Where's the Beef and the Federal Express stuff, and he had a very distinctive style, and he had carved an amazing reputation for. Yeah, he changed he changed advertising with his casting and his. People weren't the normal plastic looking people. He made these wonderful little films. So the last thing I wanted to do was to kind of like go into an industry but in animation, no one knew Sedelmaier. It was only when I got into the advertising aspect. But by that time, I had carved my own little. I mean, I started out working on the half-hour specials and the Berenstain Bears and this other dreadful stuff, but I was learning stuff. So I think I was like destined to end up doing something like this. And our daughter, Chloe, is also kind of naturally finding a path because she grew up listening to her parents talk about stuff. Her grandfather was involved in it. And it's kind of gets, I guess, into your DNA sometimes.
Was there any degree of connections that helped at all?
No.
Okay. I wasn't sure if he would have been able to say, call this guy. But again, given the fact that art directors could be out in their ass.
No, there was no, absolutely not. Which again, that was really nice. That was really nice that there wasn't,
not a nepotism thing, but a sense of.
Yeah. And it was really great that by the time the name was recognizable, I was stable, I was solid, and I could appreciate it as opposed to thinking,
they're always going to compare me to the Wendy's thing.
Exactly.
So can you talk about the transition you made from animation into managing a studio, and how you learned that you were capable of managing a business?
Well, if you had asked me that prior to 2000, and I think it was 2002, I would have had probably a different answer. But I've come to realize that what really prepared me for all of this was working at a Greek restaurant in Madison, Wisconsin.
Which ties into George Lois, another great advertising guest on the show. But sorry, go on.
And I'm half Greek.
Yeah. I was going to say.
No, Sedelmaier. Yeah, of course. Yeah. No.
Just the look, though.
Yeah. I went to a design conference in Madison in the early 2000s, and they had no idea I went to school there originally. But while I was there, I got together with my old boss, Gus, of course. And just hanging out. I had seen him a few times, stayed in touch, but we really didn't spend much time together. But this is a chance to do that. So we were just talking. After about an hour and a half, I started to go through this realization process where oh my God, okay, I started working at this restaurant as a busboy, and then I was a waiter, and then I was a bartender. Bartender was just great. And then I was kind of, by the very end of the maybe 3 years, 2.5 years, like an assistant manager. I dealt with customers. I dealt with vendors. I dealt with myself. I mean, be a bartender. You learn more about yourself than, Yeah. So when I came out of school, I had these skills that I really didn't realize I had. And when I was working up the ranks in animation, I wanted to be an animator. But once I started working at the Ink Tank with Bob Bleckman, I was there for a few months, and he made me his producer. I didn't want to be a producer. I was just starting to learn to be an animator. Again, Patrice comes into the picture. Bob wants me to be his producer. I don't want to be. No. You should be a producer. It's a good thing. You'll learn the entire process. You'll make more money. You'll be involved. You'll be in control. But I want to hold a pencil to do schedules. I want to draw. Well, had I not had that kind of background in confidence, and it can even be theatrical in some respects, I wouldn't have been comfortable not only going into being a producer, but kind of showing Bob and the clients and the agency people that there's someone here who can gather people around and, get the job done. On top of that, Bob's relatively soft-spoken, and I was a good support system for that. So I'm talking with Gus, and I'm going, oh my God, I should have gotten school credit for this. This is the most amazing, training. The other aspect of being managerial, Patrice and I run the studio together, always have. About a year almost after opening the studio, we did the first season of Beavis and Butthead. We ballooned up from 6 people, let's say, to 60 people. It was wonderful. It happened so early because it taught us exactly what we never wanted to do again. It was like all we're doing is just managing people, and I always wanted to have commercials going on because commercials allow you with their budgets and their and the visibility to be able to do the other projects that maybe don't pay so well. And so I think we made the decision early on that, yes, you're going to always have to manage people, but we don't want to be so big that eclipses the idea of staying in control of the beast, because it's quite organic. It can just all of a sudden, before you know it, just be this huge monster that you don't have any control of. And I've seen so many, especially animation studios, bigger and bigger, and they get into merchandising, and places like Colossal Pictures, which was an amazing place, and it just seemed to get too big.
Is there a degree also of becoming a target for acquisition when you get that big? That you got to be part of our bigger media empire and become a small cog in our big corporate machine?
But not any. You just say no.
Yeah.
And we never get so big that no.
That's what I'm saying. You say no until the money is too big for you to say no.
I don't think.
So again, managing for growth, but not hyper growth. Was there any indication that the Beavis and Butthead thing was going to take off as insanely as it did that first year? And I know
that
you guys,
first year. Yeah.
Yeah. I know you guys just had the production of it as opposed to managing,
What happened, what I eventually found out was we were the only studio like stupid enough to do it. They had taken this thing to everybody.
Yeah.
And then after we did it, after we signed on to do it, that's when the calls came from Colossal and all are you crazy?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Why would you do that? But we had, once it got into production and then also, and we really did handle, everything was going through us. They moved Mike Judge from Austin to Portchester, his family. And he would come here and go through drawings and go through designs and stuff. And then he'd go into the city and do records. So there was this kind of circle of stuff and it was all here. So we were, again, it was just such a monster. And then once it aired and then once it started taking off.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Well, it's one thing when you were making it thinking, it's a crazy production schedule, but it's another thing when you realize, holy shit, they're going to start ordering more and more and more of this.
Yeah. And by the time it was time for the question, do you want to do another season or we're going to do another season? It was almost kind of like understood that
here's the staff. You can hire them as a separate.
Yeah. What we did is we said no. The cake for the rap party said, we're out of here. Yeah. And we also have a coffee cup that says an animation studio up there. That is a Xerox from the press release that MTV did that decided to say an animation studio. They didn't name us. So it's like, oh, okay, this is what we're going to, we may have been the only place stupid enough to do it, but if we hadn't done it, they wouldn't have had it. And we also figured out a way of doing it digitally, with building up a library of stuff. And it was this all complex thing. It was terrific. And it was great to have done it, but it was not something we wanted to do because we were getting absorbed by Viacom and MTV. But it was really scary seeing this thing take off. And, Janet Reno, quoting shit and oh my God.
Well, the stuffing firecrackers into a bowling ball, still the thing that was going to get them in trouble. But I remember when that first Liquid Television aired. With that, I was in college and it was me and another college student from New Jersey. And we both, oh my God, did you see it? Like the next day it's
interesting because they
frog baseball
and they tested the living daylights out of it before they did it. And they had never done, a series before.
Yeah.
And they found that it was like a Three Stooges thing where guys really liked it, but women didn't like it, except in New Jersey.
Yeah. Ann Rivera and I both glommed on, and it was like, well, because we're from New Jersey, we both know guys like this who would have been.
But I thought it was fantastic. I mean, this naive drawing style that looks like they did it that's what really attracted to me. And I was constantly in the studio trying to get people, because we had everyone who worked on it were industry journeymen. They knew animation. They knew what they had to not dumb it down. They had to really be, they had to be very sensitive to what made Mike's stuff so terrific. And they couldn't use the normal little devices like doing hands. The hands is something that you learn early on because they're so complex and they can tend to be cartoony. And Beavis and Butthead had these thalidomide, appendages, unless they were doing air guitar, then it was like, which is the perfect, that's what a person who can't draw would do.
Yeah.
And so, it was a constant reminder. No, don't make it too good, keep, and you're always on your toes trying to make sure that it kept that raw look. And there wasn't anything like that on television like that before, especially when it came to animation.
Right.
So that was the exciting thing that I thought was going to be a great thing to be a part of. It was what was a great thing to be a part of.
Although I will say the early interstitial Simpsons were horrendous looking. Once upon a time, but again.
Yeah, very raw.
Yeah.
Especially when they do those reactions. It was like,
with the Tracy Ullman segments. But you talk a little, though, about working, and I will ask if you stayed in touch with Mike Judge over the years. working with illustrators who don't know what goes into animation? I mean, you mentioned little tricks like that in terms of how you did.
It's never been. It's always, that's what makes it so much fun, is because I think I probably learn more from them than they learn from us or me or anything like that. There are some designers feel like they're going to be put into the position of having to do the animation or do the drawing of the animation. No. And I don't have any set rules in terms of what they have to give us, because I've had to do things. We had to do a campaign of spots with David Levine.
Yeah.
Cross hatching and that was a case where I knew David's stuff. I had, loved it for years. And when we started working on the project, we were told by the advertising agency, you cannot talk to David Levine. If you talk to David Levine, we will have to pay him. And we have paid him to do the illustrations for the print. And we have an agreement that we can use these to translate it into TV, but you can't ask for his, it was like, oh, well, that's the most fun. I can do this, but so we ended up basically finishing the spots. And then I sent them to David and said, what I called him first and said, we're animating your stuff. And he said, oh, good Lord, why would you want to do that? But it turns out he loved animation, and he was, got the final stamp of approval. So, that's the extreme there. And then you got other things where you got like Gary Baseman, when we would work with him, he'd want to be in the studio actually working on the stuff. That was going into production. So I've learned that there's no reason to try to instill some sort of rule as to how it's done.
In that case, had Baseman done animation before, or was it more for him to, I see how you guys do this?
He started doing animation.
Because his stuff has that fluid, jaunty thing that you could imagine.
The first stuff that was ever animated for him was, in his style, was stuff, I think it was an American Cancer Society piece. And then we did, this is at the Ink Tank in the mid late 80s, some stuff for USA Today. There were these episodes, and it was great because all the voice talent was Second City stuff. Paul Dooley and Lynn Lipton, and it was just great. Then we got a set of spots for a cruise line that used his painterly style, and we had to figure out a way of doing that. And that's where he was in the studio, and he was working with us in the pre-production. And each one of those spots was different in the quality. When he started doing his own animation through Disney and his series stuff, he had to simplify it a little bit because you
can't do all that.
No, as much as he would like to. But we initially talked he wanted to hook us up just so that we could kind of give them an idea of some of the stuff that we tried, early on, to do. But he was exciting to work with because he was really manically into it. And really excited too. So again, no rules, and that's why Elwood Smith. Elwood?
Name sounds familiar.
Ooh.
I am.
He lives up in Great Barrington, and you should know him, and you should talk to him. He actually does his own little animated GIFs and GIFs, and he strongly associated with the Norman Rockwell Museum too. First time he was animated and we showed him the footage, he said, "Stop, run that back." And there was a thing where one of his characters did a backflip. He said, "Huh." I said, "What?" He said, "I always wondered what the bottom of my character's feet looked like."
It's a funny thing. I'm reading a bunch of old Hellboy comics I mentioned before we started. And I was reading this long Richard Corbin drawn one instead of the Mignola ones. And it's a great story. Everything about it is wonderful, except for his drawings of Hellboy, which just look terrible. And just it's not Mike. It's
he's got an interesting story with Corbin too. He really.
I will hit Mike up for this.
Okay. Absolutely.
But let me ask you: you've worked with legendary illustrators.
Best part of what I do.
And you had Hirschfeld and Levine and Maurice Sendak, Don Martin.
Oh.
Anyone you didn't get to in time, like someone who passed away during the time you've been doing this that you thought, man, it would have been great if we did.
I knew Maurice, but I never got a chance to work with him. Our first answering machine message on the studio machine was from Maurice in 1990. But we had a couple of projects that we had pitched together, but never came through. It killed me. I never got to work with him. We were I've never animated Jules Pfeiffer's stuff. And we actually almost did a thing with his Meanwhile book.
There's still time.
Yeah, I know.
3-book adaptation of his new
But the thing is, we're not
do you ever think long form like that?
I think in terms of pre-production, executive producing, consulting, sculpting, but production, no, not into that anymore. It's that managerial thing. But I love the idea of helping to develop whatever technique or production sensibility is going to be used in the project. But in terms of other people I would have loved to have worked with and didn't get to them soon enough. There's just been so many people I've worked with that take that away.
You've had all these other great guys.
Don Martin, and that was when I was still working at the Ink Tank. Don Martin was the time I said, "Oh, okay, I can die now."
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is it. And I can call him a friend, and I'm still in touch with Norma, his wife. Yeah. And he was just everything I could have absolutely hoped for in terms of a collaborator, comrade, friend. Ugh,
do you get dumbstruck around anyone? I know early on you must have, but
You know what helped me get over it is Neil Adams.
Yeah.
Because Neil was one of these people if I was going to move to New York, he was one of the reasons I wanted. In fact, on this little portfolio, my resume I did like in a comic strip form, and there was a thing of me there dreaming of moving to New York and meeting all these people, and I had Neil and Ditko and all these,
and that sort of neo-realist style of Adams. Or were you trying to ape that?
I was just in awe of the guy as an artist, and I still am. And I've never seen him actually draw. And I think he's an alien. I don't think he's real.
I usually say that about Chester Brown, but not for the drawing stuff. But.
So once I became friends with Neil, it was like it prepared me for other people who are just,
everybody's Joe after that, right?
Well, and the fact that I can email people like Jules and say, I just ran across this. I bet you haven't seen this. And but then you realize, well, it's what's wild is when well-known people come up to me and know my work. That's what's like.
I tell you, your name first came up when MK Brown said, you have to get together with JJ. I'm like, and you're MK Brown, therefore I will listen to anything you say about this.
She's just amazing. Yeah, that was, and to have known these people, to have known their work and to be able to actually work and solve problems with them and all this other stuff is just, it's so exciting. It's so great. It's so wonderful.
Mm-hmm. So do you have we're in your, we'll say studio
Sanctum.
Sanctum Sanctorum. If we go back to the Ditko Doctor Strange
I love the fact when you're talking about stuff too, you're pointing to books.
Oh, listen, my library at home is not organized, but it's an extension of my brain. I can figure out where everything is based on my spatial position.
So
in
it's
that
like
library.
people who have garages, like, they know where the tool. Yeah, exactly.
Except in our case, it's, Michael Tisserand's Crazy Cat book. And, and I assume you have an organizing principle that's based on your mind for this and based on height of the shelves, right?
There you go.
That's
It's like, you put everything in categories and then you deal with size and then you deal with also how can I fit more stuff, in there.
That's why you need to get shelves installed that go all the way up to the ceiling.
But then I have to find room for all the crap that's on top of this stuff.
But when I was telling my wife about coming here, she said, is it going to be like you told me with Drew Friedman's house, where it's, all of these, the Jewseum, as Drew calls it, with all the ephemera and things like that. And it's not quite that, at least not in this room or the next room over. But,
well, we've also now kind of it's distilled up here. We used to have the entire 10th floor when we had a large staff, and now everything's freelance. And that the 10th floor was just a version of this. Yeah. But it was because I had all the space, and
you'll fill it out.
No problem.
But that historical impulse, though, that sense of understanding the history of this art form, of cartooning, we'll say cartooning as both animation and print.
It's history in general too, and that's why I had sent you the print and imprint links. Yeah, those articles, and I've written over 50 of these articles, are just.
We'll get to daily, and we'll call you Stephen Heller. But until then, I'm afraid.
There's another. Have you spoken to Stephen?
Oh, just a few weeks ago. His episode's going to come right after yours.
Oh,
so,
wow!
Yeah, that's he also sends regards.
Oh, he's great. Oh, he's the best. Oh, and the careers he's launched. Oh my God, Gary Basement. Yeah. First, he made the Mecca to Steve to show his portfolio. Steve sent him over to the ink tank, and oh God. But I love history. I love sometimes it has to do with railroads, which I assume coming from Chicago and also having parents. My dad used to take me around to the train stations in Chicago before they tear them down. And my mother didn't like to fly, so wherever we traveled in the United States, it was by train. It's just romantic. Animators in general love trains. Yeah. Disney had this whole huge layout on his property, and Ward Kimball, one of his animators, they had an actual railroad that they devised, that the studio devised. There's also this kind of salvaging and trying to save. This building that we're in now is on the National Register because we got it saved so they wouldn't tear it down. That train station, that model there is a train station in Skokie, Illinois that I helped do the same with. I love getting involved in all this different stuff. And the older I've gotten, the more I've been able to incorporate it into the studio getting involved in it, because I can use the reputation of the studio and the
resources.
Yeah. So and I find that a lot of the people, cartoonists in particular, maybe it's because they spend a lot of time in their studio. The environment that they're in is this kind of nurturing, hugging thing. And books are a big part of that. Each one is like this jewel. And it's just a great environment to be in. But the history thing is just, and I curate shows on not only animation history, but design stuff. It's nice to be able to gather this information, kind of organize it in your head, and then find a way of sharing it. That's the other part of the print magazine articles. Is I've also found that once I write about something and maybe do an article, I can actually consider getting rid of the stuff, which isn't bad. I mean, my whole collection of Chicago World's Fair stuff, 1933 Century of Progress stuff, went to someone who had read the article and it's actually the owner of Radio Flyer Wagons. Oh, wow. And his granddad had designed the pavilion for the show, and he had read the article, seen that, and said, I'm redoing our home office with the Century of Progress. Would you ever consider?
All yours.
All the stuff. Yep. There you go. So I love being involved in all this different stuff, meeting the people. I get these emails from people after I've written these articles, sometimes directly related and relatives of the people I've written about. And my connection to these people is so exciting. Mm-hmm. It's just a wonderful blossoming.
Was there a degree that just because of the age cohort you were in when you came up into animation, did you have that sense of continuity, I guess?
Yes.
I talked about it with Jerry Beck, that
yes.
sense of meeting the people who were doing the early animation.
Yes. It was when I started working, the first big studio I worked at was Perpetual Motion Pictures, and they did the Berenstain Bears and Strawberry Shortcake, this dreadful stuff I was talking about before. But
a living.
Yep. But I was working with people who had been in the industry certainly since the 30s. A couple of them since the 20s. And the animation industry in the late 70s was kind of like the comic book industry, late 70s, early 80s. It was, ducks and bunnies, television for kids. It wasn't until MTV started doing stuff that, that started to evolve. So you had these older people, men and women. The women were in the ink and paint department. The men were in the animation department, who were just trying to write out the work and write out don't worry, kids will never know the difference and this kind of stuff. Yeah. There were some of us that, if you showed the least bit of enthusiasm, they'd,
it's all yours, kid.
Yep.
I sure don't want to do it.
Stories. You got the story. In fact, my first day at Perpetual Motion, this guy came up to me who ended up being a mentor of mine, a guy named Jan Svocak, and he was the guy who did Punchy for Hawaiian Punch for all, the years that I grew up with. He had this great way of working. That was just really intense. Anyway, he comes up to me and says, "Oh, you're new here?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Hey, you want some advice from an old timer?" And he's just playing me, and I'm going, "Wow, my first day." This guy's. I said, "Well, God, sure." And he said, "Here's the elevator. Run, get out of here. This place, we're all dying. Just go now while you got the chance. Work in insurance, whatever." That was the attitude.
Yeah.
But a lot of some of the stuff that I have that I use in these shows that I curate, museum shows, and actually I'll send you one that was just in Cartoon Brew. They would just end up giving me these materials. Sometimes it was discs, sometimes, and they had whether they had it from home because they would work at home sometimes. They were more than happy, instead of just putting it in the garbage, to give it to somebody who then they didn't have to worry about it anymore. Mm-hmm. And this idea that there was this connection and that you were kind of taking the baton and going forward, was great. It was really great. I don't know how much of that there is now.
That's always the goddamn kids today section of the podcast, but go on.
Well, there's also this section, especially when it comes to animation, these people who say, "Oh, you really got to work on paper and you got to feel the tooth of the paper with it." And that's like silly, because there is so much flexibility and so much control you can have now because of, digital stuff. When we still had a large staff, probably in the early 2000s, I decided to do a spot conventionally when it was still practical to be able to do it, just to show the people in the studio what it was like to work on cell. And I think it was pretty clear that, this was a pain in the ass.
I've told this story before. When I went into trade magazine editing, where at both companies I worked at, you did your own layouts. Mm-hmm. And thank God Quark existed at that point, because if I had to do manual paste ups and cutting it. The magazine would look like a serial killer had made it. And obviously nobody would be interested. They'd be committing me. Luckily, nobody caught on because I was able to use online or, computerized layout.
And, Mike Mignola last night was talking about, he's just he's ink on paper, traditional. George Booth, who for years, his way of working was to, Bleckman too, paste up, cut out, put in, white out, tape. That all goes away when you stab it. But now with scanning, you'll pick up, the adhesive on the back of the tape. It's just everything shows. If you can't, roll with the technology, it can be really rough. There are a lot of people who got out of animation just because they were not.
I can't learn this program.
No. And look, I can speak from the standpoint if I had to make that jump, I don't know how well I would have done, but I was on the end that was, designing and directing and producing by that time. So I wasn't really concerned about it. Mm-hmm. My mother taught me how to paste up and do layout, keyline paste up stuff. And, I'm glad I learned it, but, it gets very frustrating when people think that you can't do your art. You're not doing justice to the art somehow.
Oh, again, it's another thing that's come up repeatedly, but the first time I had Ben Catcher on the show, we did a live one and he said, I've been drawing on a tablet for a couple of years now. Mm-hmm. And half the audience gasped and the other half said, you can totally tell because his line changed. None of them said, his comics are terrible. Mm-hmm. Just the quality of the line is different now.
Yeah. Ward Sutton was one of the early.
Yeah. And he has that slick looking style.
Yeah. He could work in Illustrator really nice. And it actually made his art. That's the way he wanted it to look anyway.
Yeah. Do you do the road not traveled thing? Do you think about what you would have been doing if you'd stuck with animation instead of moving up and managing and producing?
I think it was the right decision what I did.
I wonder, do you ever look and think, I wonder because if I've been...
No, because what's wonderful is I don't have to, as much as I loved working on a scene and flipping while I was working and watching it, and then seeing it, included in whatever project you were working on. The flexibility to bounce around all over the place, work on different things. Even when we had a large staff in the studio, we'd have maybe 5 things going on at the same time. And I liked that too, because they were all at different levels and it was very stimulating. And if you could organize this and then actually pull it off, which is the part of doing a project that I really like. It's like there's sometimes too, you spend so much time up front just trying to get the job or make it happen that by the time it's either awarded or you're ready to go, you're like, oh, okay, now I got to do it now. Jesus. I don't think I would have been, it probably would have just kind of languished.
You would have pursued a path like this anyway.
Well, and to be able to actually have an influence on what the thing is, as opposed to just a little aspect of it is, that's the fulfilling part.
Do you feel there's any sort of house style to
certainly not graphically.
Yeah.
There's an attitude, I'd like to
characterize
think,
that,
which is just, I guess there's a kind of like a persona that we have from, there's the SNL, Adult Swim, Comedy Central type of irreverent thing. And then there's the commercial thing, which is maybe timing. And I've been told that from other people. There's this, especially when you have minimal characters on the screen together, there's not there's not a cartooniness to it unless I'm saying something about cartooniness. That's why parody and satire is such a wonderful realm to work in, because you get to do a technique, but you get to use it as a device beyond what it was like originally developed for. You can speak two languages at the same time. So maybe there's not a house style. Do you sense a house style, or No,
I mean, there's a couple of the superhero things, have a similar, like that, the Captain Linger and
the Captain Linger stuff was great because that was just so like wrong.
It's just so awkward.
Yeah, that's just so. I love
even
that
the opening credits
factor.
Where you just wait an extra 4 or 5 seconds while he's just standing there for something.
Especially when nowadays every millisecond is filled with something that's supposed to be happening, and that's what was
just the agonizing wait.
That. Yeah,
and between that and Ace and Gary and things like that, they have a certain visual style, but that's.
But
what you're doing as a pastiche.
You said, Howard said, "Oh, haven't shown you the Superman parody."
Yeah, not yours.
No, but we're known for having done so much of that, and that was also on the coattails of. I think that was one of the first cartoons done for Robert Smigel's TV Funhouse show on Comedy Central, not the SNL stuff. And we only exclusively did the SNL cartoons the first 3 seasons. There was another thing that we kind of ran away from and bailed from because it was starting to take us over. And they certainly didn't have budgets that could justify after a while the amount of time it was taking to do them.
Just the manpower to do a 2-minute cartoon in like 10 days.
Yeah. And after a while, there was one guy who worked in the studio, Sean Luttrell, who I knew when things were tough, when the knit cap came out. When he was wearing the knit cap, I knew that, okay, we're like 3 days away from a shower, and this is the 3rd night he's spent here. And but those three seasons built up this portfolio of the most wonderful. Talk about doing justice to animation. Those things were fabulous for animation.
But getting away from them was a way to avoid being typecast as far as.
Well, yeah, but that didn't work. I mean, what happened was we started getting calls from advertising agencies.
They just assumed you were still doing it because it looked like you're.
No, they'd call. And you knew what the call was when I got because it happened enough. I knew what was going on. It was like, okay, good. I got him. Now, hi, I work at this advertising agency, and we were wondering if you would ever consider doing a commercial. And I'd say, if you go to your library, you'll probably find like 5 of our reels. Yeah. You're not discovering anything here. And that's when I realized, as popular as our stuff was, and as popular as, in general, the cartoons were, we were getting typecast as doing this kind of shitty animation that made you laugh. But it was depriving us of the involvement in other projects that we don't have our names stamped on, that are working in all these different styles and styles that haven't even been done yet. And so I said, okay, fine. We're not going to do Saturday Night Live anymore. We're going to go on this campaign to say, we're more than Saturday Night. Well, good luck with that. I mean, chickens,
victim of success.
Yeah. The only thing I could say to Smigel was just make sure they're good, because people think we're still doing them. Yeah. Not that there was any chance they weren't going to be good, but it was just, my God. So that didn't work. Yeah.
Yeah. How has the job changed? I mean, you talk about the shift to digital, et cetera, the way advertising agencies deal with animation now, the way screens change going to a phone.
Well, the way it's
TV.
changed is there are so many different venues for the craft. And with the the appearance of online stuff, which no one knows how to either charge for or pay for. And the fact that advertising agencies struggle just to stay, you walk into some of the larger advertising agencies and how do they do this? It's the small places that seem to be, nimble and doing the really fantastic work, but there's much less structure to the industry, and it's still very exciting because you see stuff and you're able to do stuff that would have never gotten produced before. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I or we were starting a studio now, how we do that.
Yeah, that usually comes up with guests. If you were starting out today, and it's especially in an area like yours, I'm sure it's
because
the opportunities it helps you launch aren't exactly there.
Well,
or am I wrong in that?
Well, they're certainly not there the same way they were. Mm-hmm. But I look at the animation studios that I know of that are around now that seem to be doing good stuff, and they seem to still conform to the traditional model. I'm thinking of Titmouse. I'm thinking of even Augenblick in Brooklyn. They associate themselves with the networks, whether it's Cartoon Network and Adult Swim or whatever it is that is able to do edgy stuff, but still provide them with budgets that will support a large enough staff. That's the traditional model. But when it comes to commercial stuff, because it's actually possible for one person to do a lot of the stuff themselves, as opposed to needing a studio, and because people are somewhat more savvy about how production is done, and because anything goes, and you might be able to do a technique that's done on your, iPad, for that matter. There are so many different ways of producing the stuff that it dilutes.
Levels, you say levels a playing field, or does it make it economically not feasible to sustain something like this if you're starting out trying to build something?
We're not sustaining anything because it's all freelance, and sure. The reason I have a pretty big Facebook presence and the other areas of social media, and the reason that is because I sit in front of a computer all day. All the stuff, whether it's reviewing footage, doing storyboards, working with animators and whatever, it's all done virtually. And the reason we're working that way is because we don't want the obligation of trying to keep a studio going when we really aren't doing that type of work anyway. And we're not looking to support a large staff in order to run our business. I don't know that I've ever been happier because there are so many wonderful things I can be involved in addition to animation. But boy, yeah, if I were to try to open a studio now, I'd probably try to just, hook on to some sort of, money base, whether it was a network, whether it was a corporate thing. But I've also learned that you don't want to really hook on to any, just by doing large campaigns for advertising agencies. If you start to depend on that too much, it just goes away. And advertising agencies have the same problem. They'll have a client that they put all their dedication to, and then the client changes, and they're like, I don't want to work with you anymore. And then you're bye-bye.
And this is what I saw on the business magazine side.
Yeah, it's just the way business is.
Right. And we've all seen Mad Men.
Government, the same thing. It's just, yeah.
So When it's a literary guest, I usually ask the Bleak House or Middlemarch question. But for somebody who has a comics background like this, I have three dichotomies, and I'm hoping it indicates something about your personality. Harriman or McKay? Who do you prefer?
Oh, I have trouble choosing.
Yeah.
And they're so different.
That's what I wonder. Do you find yourself leaning towards, I like Winsor McKay because it's closer to the roots of the animation and everything?
Yeah, but then you've got this amazing universe that Harriman has set up. And then you even got, I love Milt Gross. Milt Gross has this crazy, and the dialect, you could, if you were to ask me Raymond or Foster, I'd go Raymond.
Interesting.
Okay. Foster's like, bleh. Pretty, but Alex Raymond, you can see, brush strokes and so forth. To choose between McKay and, especially with McKay's, involvement with animation,
Kurtzman or Eisner?
Or who?
Will Eisner.
Oh God.
Okay, so Kurtzman.
No. I love Will Eisner.
I thought you were making that face.
We were talking about great comic book heroes.
Yeah.
My father got me that book in 1965. The Flash and Superman and Batman. My father kept all his comics, so I grew up reading the first Batman, and he still got them. Green Llama, Captain Marvel. Then I get to the end of it, and there's this. What's the guy with the hat and the mask?
What's the Sandman?
The Spirit.
Oh, okay.
And I said, what?
Yeah.
It's like, he said,
you'll grow up.
Wait till you get older. And he wasn't saying it like, yeah, my boy, you'll like that. No, he was just saying, I can kind of understand why. And I didn't know the connection with Pfeiffer and Eisner at that point.
Yeah.
1974, Warren comes out with the Eisner, the Spirit reprints. Oh my God. It just completely took me over. And the fact that he lived in White Plains, and I was talking to Dennis Kitchen about, it just kills me. I never got a chance to, I saw Pfeiffer interview Eisner at Cooper Union. But I didn't get a chance to, meet him. And oh God, no, Eisner, Kurtzman again. I can't even begin to separate. I just can't. I love
the last one's even worse. Kirby, Ditko, Toth.
Oh God.
I'm awful with these things.
They're all so great.
Well, I'm glad they're all meaningful for you, and it's not one of those, I could never stand X.
Oh, no.
Because I couldn't get either Kirby or Ditko when I was a little kid. Because, again, I was coming in that Neil Adams, John Byrne era. It took me years before I got, no, you couldn't do any of that without these guys, and this is why Kirby was great. So.
Nah. They're all so.
I just like putting people on the spot.
It's so great when you've got those cartoonists that have such a distinct style.
Yeah.
And 1980, maybe 1988, I'm walking west on 45th Street. There was a Hamburger Harry's there, and I think there was a Lowe's theater. I'm walking towards Times Square. Just happened to glance up and see the register of a building that shows the tenants in the building. And I just look through the window, and I see S. Ditko. And I go up to the guy who's sitting at the desk, and this is pre, 9/11, so you could. And I said, "Is that Steve Ditko? This is a modern kind of building, glass and chrome and all this stuff." He said, "I don't know." So I see the room number. I take the elevator up. Doors open. Suddenly it's Maltese Falcon, marble and transoms and all this other stuff. And I find this door, and it's one of these, textured glass with that grate that was screwed on the.
Yeah.
And I knock on the door, and it opens after a while, a little crack, and this guy with glasses, bald head and glasses, looks through, and I said, "Are you Steve Ditko?" And he says, "Yes." And suddenly I go, I'm thinking,
what do I do now?
I didn't even think about this. Question. What do I do now? Okay. I just got to say, you're like, oh my God, it's so great to meet you. I read all your stuff. I love all your stuff. And it's just so great to meet you. He's, oh, and I'm looking in there and it's like one of these things with the window to the shaft, but there's no light ever going to come down there. And he just said, thanks, and closed the door. That was it. Never went back. Never tried to figure it out. Never.
Did you ever see the Jonathan Ross documentary about Finding Ditko?
I saw parts of it, and I always meant to watch the whole thing.
It's only about an hour, but it's got that scene where Ross and Neil Gaiman are outside the building, and they say we're allowed to go up. He knows we're coming, but we can't bring the camera crew. But you see the two of them are just kind of bubbling, and it fades, and then you see them back on the sidewalk, and they're both just giddy. These two men are just, oh my God, we got to meet Steve Ditko. Oh my God, I can't even tell you what went on, and it's just.
Well, I knew Dick Ayers.
Yeah.
Dick lived like a mile over here in White Plains, and we got a call at the studio. And the receptionist said, JJ, it's a Dick Ayers on phone. I pick it up and I go, hello? Mm-hmm. He said, JJ, hi, this is Dick Ayers. I don't know if you know me. Of course I know you. What do you? I live in White Plains, and my son's paints, and he's actually done some animation. I was wondering if I'd just come over with my son and say hi. And we were fast friends after that. He ended up doing the layouts for a Playboy comic book that I did with Robert Smigel. Nicest guy. Nice Dick was. Well, I'll find it and give it to you. It was we did a studio comic book. I had Alex Ross do the cover, and but Dick was just. And then we went over to his place, and he was showing he had all the artwork up, and it's nice, just the nicest person. But no, I can't separate those people.
I guess it's easier with books that you can just have more of a Middle March guy than a Bleak House guy. But
and maybe you separate Macro Boy from Alex Raymond. You can do that because.
I was going to say we also have the How to Read Nancy back there, so I'm sure we could have thrown Bushmiller versus someone,
that book has converted me. I never liked Nancy.
Yeah, same here.
And I think
that experience, though.
Yeah. Have you spoken to Mark?
I got them together. They didn't want to do separate ones. Mark and Paul wanted to talk together about that book. Okay. It's a fun conversation because they spent so much time on it and interacting with each other on it. So getting them to jointly bounce back and forth about it was really a nice flow. But yeah, no, I had no natural affinity to Nancy. I never got it. I think Spiegelman said it's harder not to read Nancy than to read Nancy when you're like looking at the funny pages. And how did it change you?
But I don't know if it.
What did it open up that you didn't consider before?
Well, first of all, the fact that two people, and especially Mark, who I've known for a while and respect, he was showing me something he liked with the book. So, I got to look at it. And then I've gone to a couple of their presentations. I went to the one that Ben Catcher did, and which was like
the fire SRO. Department. Well, I heard they had to throw people out because there were too many.
It was the last time I saw Bob Grossman, too. He was there. Yeah. And then I went to the one Society of Illustrators. And then, of course, the one at Mocha. But I think it was the presentation that they did in the book to say, come on, look at this stuff.
Yeah.
It's pretty wacky. I'm not convinced Bushmiller knew that. And I think humor? It's our modern, view of stuff and devices that, and you can understand why, Webster's or whoever used Nancy as the epitome of the comic strip. But normally when somebody does a time to get a life sort of profile like this, you go, oh, come on, give me a break. No, this is really very amazing. And I found it very entertaining, and it's gotten me to, look at the stuff and not go, oh my God, this is high art. It's just, okay, this is worth looking at. I never would have given it the time of day.
Yeah. Just this guy really knew what he was doing in this.
He definitely, he knew what he was doing, and he was doing things very consciously, but it's also of another time and another dimension and another.
Yeah, I saw they're supposed to have some new artists doing new Nancys.
There should be a law against that.
Yeah, and I saw some panel of her and Sluggo with iPhones or something sitting on it was just one of those like, sure, whatever.
That's just, this whole.
Actually, well, to talk about that, though, because not a lot, some of the animation of yours is, again, as you said, pastiches of past styles, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
How much of a trap is nostalgia in that respect?
Trap? It's a narcotic.
Yeah.
It'll make you see things that just aren't there.
Is it? Yeah. Is it too easy to? Well, again, talk about that. What is the nostalgia opiate?
And everyone's got their own thing going. Tapping into that is interesting. If the fact that you can look at Scooby-Doo and just go, oh my God, it's just so great. And it's because you grew up with it.
Yeah.
Mighty Mouse to me, because I grew up watching it every Saturday morning. Terrible animation. Yeah. It's Terry Toons is just classically awful. However, Jim Tyre, his animation, this straight ahead kind of frenetic stuff, is very unique, and I like that now, having been in the industry for a while and looked at so many different styles. But there was this sloppiness to it. I think you have to separate at certain points where nostalgia has, it is pumping through the veins, and what's really worth considering as something that's, whether it's artistic, even tasteful. It's handy to have that under control when you're doing something like parody and satire, because you can deal with a clear head. I think the first time I noticed the effect, probably the Speed Racer thing. We did a Volkswagen Speed Racer spot where we were dealing with something that was clearly, they were reaching a demographic because they were playing on that. But when somebody says they like something, sometimes you can tell it's not because it's really great stuff. It's because they harbor this.
Yeah, the kitsch factor.
Yeah. And even the kitsch factor, kitsch is different, because kitsch is, you're making a value judgment. You're just saying this is interesting because it's so bad. Yeah. Whereas nostalgia,
that comfort food aspect. Then.
Yeah. And there's just so much. Now and advertisers certainly play off of that as well. I mean, our He-Man, our Geico spot.
Right there, you've got a Geico ad for He-Man, which is hysterically funny, but it was a shitty cartoon when I was growing up. That was, because I was already a teenager.
It's very interesting because I wanted to play up the badness, and Mattel was protecting their property. I mean, there's this
just putting those figures up, just aping the style from the 80s is exaggerating how bad it was. Just replicating that is, one of those.
And that's the Ace and Gary thing too.
Yeah.
That's going back a prior generation. But there's this thing, you can even pull it out of, if you look at a lot of the YouTube stuff where He-Man would look up like this. And we have a shot like that in the cartoon. And there's this low angle shot, which is the cartoon back then saying, we're going to do something heroic and dynamic here. And yet but we're going to really not know how to draw. And so it's just, you look at it and it just makes you shudder. But when you're doing, parody, you can grab that and it's wonderful.
That's a signifier right there.
I tried to put that kind of stuff in. It was like, nah.
Yeah, but it's enough just having Skeletor, pumping his fist. Yes,
well, and that's the modern thing. Because when we were I was looking for something to do. I'm glad you caught that. Yeah. Because when we were doing the voice record, I was trying to figure out something that was going to be a modern thing
that he would be
but that he would still do
contemporary.
If it was, and that was the perfect thing. And I was worried I wasn't going to have the screen time to do that, and that I wasn't that maybe they were going to ask me to try to bring it to the forefront. And I love the fact that it was in the background. If you missed it the first or second time, and the thing is shown a gazillion times, and you kind of know that about these things, that it's always nice to catch something, down the line that you didn't catch the first time. But but when you can effectively do parody and satire, and we've done Speed Racer, we've done Disney, we've done Schoolhouse Rock, we've done all these, it, I think, really shows how good a grasp you have on not only the material, but the effect that the material has. And it's a lovely way to show off. It really is.
You ever teach?
I have, and I do enjoy it. I actually took over John Canemaker's intermediate animation course at NYU a year and a half ago. It was the first time I had done an actual full semester of teaching, because I'd done like
fill-in or
workshops or stuff like that. But it was great, and each student had to do 30-second to a minute film. And I think we covered, just by happenstance, every conceivable technique. And it was great. I loved it.
Students get what you're doing? Is there a degree that, again, time for those goddamn kids section?
I have a lot of friends who teach, and I don't know why I say at the beginning of everything, because you probably don't until I say it. So it's a really stupid thing to say. I think one of the things they enjoyed the most was I happened to have been in production at the beginning of the semester on a campaign of spots that it just so happened was going to finish at the end of the semester. So part of the class time was spent actually going through what I was going through. And I was not only showing them the material, but I was also taking them through the process, and even kind of relaying the frustration I was having with maybe trying to get an idea across or trying to achieve something and so forth. And after speaking to them after the semester was over, I found that, it was really nice, because they actually got to see something that was in production. I think because I've done enough stuff that has been in the mainstream, whether it's SNL or Colbert or stuff like that. And I was also trying to show them the things that I liked and influenced me to get involved and interested in animation.
What were those influences? Because I don't think we've really talked.
Well,
besides Strawberry Shortcake,
the Fleischer Superman cartoons that I saw for the first time when I was in high school, and then the Warner Brothers cartoons in terms of comedy. I didn't get to see anything like Tom and Jerry or even Tex Avery until I moved to New York. Because in Chicago, the TV stations there only showed Terry Toons, Warner Brothers, good Warner Brothers, and that was about it. We didn't get the MGM cartoons. So that's what I was brought up. I love Disney, but I never laughed at a Disney cartoon. Yeah. And they were also, again, divvied out very carefully theatrically, or maybe on Sunday nights they might show one of the cartoons. So it's not like you had, you could screen them whenever you wanted to. However, because my parents were both interested in film, we had 16 millimeter prints of some of the stuff. Like I had 16 millimeter color Superman cartoons. My dad, I think, had every single Laurel and Hardy movie.
I should have asked that one. Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, or Three Stooges.
I would have at a certain,
as a Jew, I'm Marx Brothers, but
at a certain point, I would have put the Three Stooges low rung. But Curly,
that's
you
true.
just can't beat Curly.
Drew Friedman really says you don't understand the comic genius of Curly.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And Marx Brothers from Monkey Business to Night at the Opera. After
Coconuts and all that stuff you can.
Before or after, it was just
but it's that.
And we had a copy of Duck Soup. I had a 16 millimeter copy. I still have high school friends who say, I figured out a way of fitting Duck Soup into my history courses in school so that I could screen that stuff. And My Little Chickadee Fields, W.C. Fields. And these are influences that have been on my dad as well. Keaton, Chaplin. We've got every Keaton, Chaplin, Fields, Marx Brothers, Three Stooges film here in the studio. I think maybe you could count on one hand the amount of people who've been through the studio that have taken advantage of that. But I know there are a lot of people who teach are very frustrated with kids. But I'm having trouble seeing a big difference between the way kids have always been. You always had the people who were obsessive about, certain realms of whether it was comedy, film, whatever. And then the majority of the people aren't that way. It's just now that everything's available, I don't think the obsession is as defined, because at any given moment, whether it's YouTube or whatever, you can pull up whatever you want. And as, a young person, you just take that for granted. I hate sounding like, kids now. And,
those kids today.
Yeah. I just know.
I think that infinite jukebox thing, though, does potentially hurt what we were talking about in terms of that sense of continuity. Something Karasik brings up in terms of teaching comics. He has students who've literally never seen Superman. Like he'll show it and they just don't know who the character is. And it's like, I don't understand how you're here without knowing that, but that's possible now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of weird. That's one of the, kids today things, that it's just understanding what that availability means and how it changes the resources that you have.
And I try to jump ahead and figure out, okay, once we're all dead and gone, what does this kind of gestate into? What does this become? What is it? There won't be just this disregard for history, but it's a different way of understanding it and processing it. And then, what is it all going to become?
As someone pointed out, now that we all have cell phones and video everywhere, nobody's citing Bigfoot or UFOs anymore. That doesn't seem to happen now that everybody can actually just shoot a video of things. And
Interesting. Yeah. That disc jockey who was obsessed with
Art Bell.
Yeah, he just died.
He just died. Yeah. I think it's Art Bell, Milos Forman, and I'm waiting.
Oh, really?
I want to see who the third person is.
Who just died?
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
It's those two, plus there has to be a third incredibly weird one. Given that it was those two in the last day, that'll chances are be somebody either incredibly strange or incredibly prosaic. Blackman asks, projects you haven't done yet that you'd like to get to? Given that I think my conversation with Blackman multiple times revolved around the fact that he feels like a failure as an artist and that he should actually be making feature animations.
He's always felt that way.
Yeah. You don't seem to carry that sense of you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Nope. And the idea of working on a feature length project
or just any project,
long form project holds no interest to me. I mean, right now, I'm even at the point now where I'm 62 years old and they can't take anything away from me, you know? And it's not like I don't have things I want to do. It's just like, oh my God, I've got this stuff in my wake that's really cool. And there are people that know that, and people who respect it, and people who even kind of explain things about that to me that I hadn't considered. I've got 2 kids in their 20s. Well, our daughter's going to be 30. Logan and Chloe, both, we have fun with the fact that, you know, Patrice and I have done all this. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like wide open ahead. I don't have anything that I haven't done. And there's stuff that I will do that I didn't even realize I wanted to do because I start doing one thing and it feeds into another. It's, to me, I'm looking for people to collaborate with on different levels. And that's why I love getting these emails in the morning from people who read an article I wrote, 5 years ago. And with some insight, information, and the fact that these things are online, I can go in and revise them. And they're these, again, organic things that I can, they're always out there. And then I can also send links to people about stuff. No. And I know Bob feels bad about not having done a feature. And we were talking when I interviewed him last month or a couple of weeks ago. He was talking about the same thing and being in the Signal Corps and being in the Army and being exposed to that opportunity that he didn't take advantage of. And he just, and when I worked with him, there were a couple projects, we did the Hollywood circuit and pitching and all this stuff. And, I especially with that man's body of work and the influence he's had on people and the truly monumental achievements he's done with his craft.
I will admit being shell-shocked when I was driving home thinking that guy feels like a failure. And yet
I think that's a character thing with some artists.
Yeah. But to have some artists just feel like a failure because nothing they did came out the way they'd envisioned it. I mean, he considers a decision in his 20s to have tainted everything for the next 60 years. I'm like, I don't think anyone who knows your work would agree with you on this. But
I said precisely the same thing in the recording. I said, I hope you understand that there are a lot of people out there who are kind of happy that you did and made the decision you made.
Yeah.
And he also confronted fame very early on.
Yeah.
Which was, he admits was, had a kind of squirrely impact on him.
But from your end, this is, I don't want to say the life you envisioned, but this is the career path you saw. That's your
fucking ridiculous.
Yeah. That you get to do this.
And I get to do it with these people.
Yeah.
No, I would be ashamed of myself to say that,
but I really should be directing. That's
yeah. It's like, what are you complaining from the yacht or something like that? I don't know. No, I'm very, very happy. And also, and it's not like, I've done it all. Now I can just, crawl in a hole and die. No, it's, there's still stuff to do. And those, again, those vistas are still there, which is nice. Cause when you get older, you start going, ugh.
That's actually the other contrast, with Bob was when I recorded with Seymour Quast a few months ago. It was difficult because he expressed no interest in looking back. Everything was the next project.
Wow. Wonderful.
Yeah. And that was a weird vibe for me because I thought we were going to kind of talk life, influences, history, what you were doing that led no interest, like a shark. He just, nope, it's the next thing. That's what I'm concerned with.
That's fantastic.
Okay, let's move in that direction instead.
No, yeah, he's another amazing. Oh, look, the whole Pushman group. My God, that's just New York is just so fantastic.
Yeah.
And for all the people that are still around too,
Glazer's still out there.
Yeah.
I don't know. Nobody. I'd like to pitch him, but I don't know if I don't know what state he's in.
Oh God, no. You should absolutely pitch him.
Yeah, I just didn't know if he's in decline at all, in health or anything like that. I just haven't asked. So
no.
Yeah.
I think, in fact, he just did some sort of seminar overseas.
So I will hunt him down.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. See, my big thing was to encircle and put the pincer move on Ed Sorel, which really, at some point, I even got Graydon Carter on my side now because I bumped into him in an airport once, and that was his first. Once I explained the show, he's like, you need to talk to Ed Sorel. I'm like, I'm ahead of you on that one, Graydon, but if you can help push me on
Karen could probably help you with Ed.
Oh, I've reached him, but it's a matter of convincing him.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh God, I would think he would do it.
He was a yes, and then he was a no. So we'll see. I figure if I get enough of his peers around him, that could possibly lead to, a show where a guy tries to sabotage me the whole time. And
oh, and the new, also, have you spoken to Steve Brodner?
We've talked about doing one. He's the guy who, and you can correct him if he's wrong. We met at Joe Chardello's gallery opening in Central Jersey, near Frenchtown, for the spaghetti Western illustrations that Joe does. And Drew Friedman was there. I was talking with him, Steve, and a couple of other illustrators. And we mentioned that I just recorded with Barry Blitt, and someone asked, did Barry draw you after? And I said, no, actually, no illustrator has ever, or cartoonist has ever drawn me. And 4 illustrators stand there and all just start staring at me for the next couple of seconds. After which Brodner says, yeah, you got nothing to exaggerate. Which I think is a compliment as far as that world goes.
Well, knowing Steve, it was probably, it was half serious.
Yeah, no, even Drew was like, yeah, but he's a good looking Jew. So we need those on our side too. So, but I was like, I think it's the greatest compliment I've ever been paid. I'm not sure. Illustrators don't think I'm worth, goofing on.
Yeah. Well, okay.
But yeah, Steve and I, we've talked about doing one. I'd love to.
Steve, Ann Tellness.
Yeah. Ann and I recorded down in Washington. I keep a mind map of where all the guests come from, like who connected me to whom. In her case, it's a sad story. I got her through Matt Worker.
I don't know who that is.
Matt's a Pulitzer-winning political illustrator, political cartoonist down at the Washington Post. Matt I got because I had pitched Richard Thompson, the cartoonist from Cul-de-sac who had MS or Parkinson's and died way too young from that. He had it already when I pitched him early on in the life of the show. And he said, yes, tentatively. I had a Washington trip coming for work. And he said, Gil, I'm so sorry. He emailed, it's gotten worse. My voice sounds like what I think a mosquito going through puberty would sound like. But is it okay if I connect you with my friend Matt instead? So Matt turns out to be the current Pulitzer winner for political cartooning. And I'm like, dude, you're dying of Parkinson's. I'm some schlub from New Jersey. You don't need to do me a favor or anything. I'm
he sounds like he was a truly
he was a saint.
Guy.
Everyone I've met. I actually told that story to his wife after a tribute short documentary about him. She's like, that was Richard. That's just who he was. He would, in the midst of everything he was going through, I don't want to disappoint that guy from New Jersey who's coming down anyway for business and isn't he? So anyway, that led me to Matt. That led me to Anne, who
I adore. She's another person who came through the ink tank.
Oh, did she? I had no idea she was part of a.
No, she wasn't She when she was coming from California, and she.
Oh, that's right. She started in animation. That's right.
And she came with her portfolio, and this amazing, vibrant drawing. From 1987, maybe. And just always stayed in touch with her. I was hoping there was going to be some way that we could work together. And it turns out, evidently, I was like one of the only people who responded, positively or something, which I still don't understand. And even at MoCA this past week, she said, I'll never forget, how you, I mean,
was there a bias against women particularly? Would there have been? I mean, MK Brown years before.
Well, yes, there could have been, but it wouldn't have been coming from Bob or me. So, there wasn't anything in animation. It was rough for women.
Yeah, that's what I wondered. You were one of the few who would have not immediately just said Ann Tellness and thrown it out. Was,
but she could draw. Yeah. Oh boy. And it's between Steve and Ann, Victor Hujas. Yeah. And John Cuneo and oh God, the stuff that's being done now is just so.
Do you see that though, coming from younger? Do you keep in touch with younger illustrators and
I haven't seen younger,
because political
cartoonists.
Yeah, I hate being biased like that, but I mean, there's Matt Bors and a few younger guys, but they're already.
And Steve, Steve teaches his course at SVA, so he's, and actually I have friends who are my age who are taking his course because of
caricature
all this stuff.
He's doing one
illustration,
but yeah.
Such great stuff going on now. I just wish it wasn't because the material was so.
Yeah, well, that was when I first recorded with Tom Tomorrow when the Trump campaign first began, and he was worried then. And at the same time, people were saying, "Why would you care? This is all material for you." He's like, "Really? The future of the Republic's a bit more important than whether I have a weekly strip." That's
It was like watching The Daily Show when. That magical hour of Daily Show and Colbert.
Yeah.
And just going, you never really soulfully laugh because it's so painful.
Right. Have you done political?
Just the animations we've done, but never cartooning.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, no, within animation, do you?
Oh, well, the SNL stuff.
Yeah, true.
But the SNL stuff was really, and when those things hit with Clinton, oh my God, there was nothing in terms of animation, especially mainstream network animation that doing that stuff where he's holding up the dress and it's just dripping in semen, it just, oh my God.
But it's good. It was a corrective because from then on, we've had presidents who haven't had any sort of sexual scandals happen around. Do you feel an impulse to do that sort of work nowadays, though? Or is it, again, you're going to leave this to the political cartoonists and the professionals in that area? Or were those opportunities?
It's not even a thought.
That's not a commercial thing. So it's
There have been a few people that I would love to partner up with and do stuff with, but no, it's not something like I'm going to stay away from that.
Yeah. Are there? Can you name names in terms of people you'd love to work with?
Well, I would love to work with Steve Brodner, and we've been looking for something to do for a long time. I would endless. I mean, really, I would love to do something with Chris Ware because and actually the stuff until I saw that PBS piece, which I think had some animation in it. Or I saw some recently. Okay. Yeah. Because I had seen something done before that was not good, and it was not taking advantage of translating his stuff into film. It was just moving his stuff.
Yeah.
And that's again what's so exciting about the process is that translation is trying to get inside it, feeling it, and then rolling it over into film, which is a completely different language. Charles Burns. I'm hesitating only because it really is. It's an endless.
Anyone you name, everybody else is going to be, who doesn't want to work with me?
Yeah, right.
They're all listening.
I just want to keep having fun doing the stuff, and that's why the Ford stuff with MK and Al Jaffe and Bill Plimpton was so much fun, is because it was really a chance. If it sucked, it was no one else's fault but your own, and then I'd always wanted to work with Bill, except that you don't really work with Bill. Bill just does it.
That's what I was going to ask, because he's a very strong-willed animator.
I totally was a producer.
Okay.
I totally had nothing. I think maybe I had a comment or an opinion about maybe some of the sound, but no, I'm not going to tell Bill.
I pitched him that first morning at Mocha because he was by himself at his table, and I just came up. I would love to sit down with you sometime to record a conference. That'd be great. Traded cards, etc. So I think it's pretty funny that the two people I come out of Mocha with are you and Bill Plimpton.
He's like one of the last independent animator forces. And it's really, it was always nice because for years as a student out of school in New York, you could maybe go to Bill's, or you could go to Michael Sporn, who was another filmmaker who had his own studio that were small, intimate environments to work in and learn the craft. And also they had traditional, conventional techniques that they were still using. But Michael passed away a few years ago, and Bill's it. And Bill's, in terms of self-promotion and doing his own stuff, he's an amazing force. He really is.
I'll try and connect with him. Again, last year was getting a bunch of illustrators on the show. This year will be a bunch of animation-related people.
And he's got cartooning in his background. He was a cartoonist.
Yeah, remember
sometimes he likes to talk about it. Sometimes he doesn't like to talk about it.
Yeah, I put people at ease, apparently. So a question from David Leopold, who you probably don't know, but is Al Hirschfeld's archivist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, Drew Friedman connection. I have a whole story behind that one that I'll fill you in on after we're off. He connected me with Harry Katz, who's David Levine's archivist.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. But David's question was, you've said in the past that Hirschfeld's work is timeless, and he wants your opinion on what makes Hirschfeld's work. What makes it so good? Why was it such an influence on a number of animators? Because he's seen that also. I think you've said it, but other animators have also said Hirschfeld is somehow an influence on what they do in terms of animation.
Maybe in terms of caricature. I wonder because, and I know that Hirschfeld's stuff was probably the strongest inspiration for Aladdin. I think it started as a Hirschfeld influence and then went to somebody else and then became what we recognize it as. Well, some of this timelessness has to do with the fact that if you look at what he had done over the course of since the 20s.
Yeah, we'll say about 80 years. Yeah.
He had established that, that style and that look, and that it's not a device, but that technique, and carried it through. His Marx Brothers caricature is probably still being used. It's probably the one that people even think of when they think of the Marx Brothers.
I think that was the line that Groucho started doing the grease paint differently because of the Hirschfeld drawings.
I'd never heard that.
You wanted the mustache to be more, the eyebrows had to be up a little higher because that's how it looks so good in Hirschfeld's.
You imagine going like 50 years and people seeing a Marx Brothers movie, and it's like, why
does he have a face painted on?
What is that? Why does he walk like that? Yeah, he just did his thing, and it was welcomed, it was accepted, he nailed the caricatures.
Mm-hmm. And just the spareness of the line and that sort of vibrant thing.
It was. It's funny because we did that NBC thing with him, and I wasn't going to do that project without meeting him.
Yeah.
So I called and asked. I called him and I asked him. I said, we're working on the Peacock, and I thought maybe you could do some drawings of feet or something. I don't know what your peacock feet look like. And sure, come on over. I'll have them for you. Wow, going through that brownstone and going up those stairs and seeing these things that he had, gotten. And the place looked like it hadn't received attention for a long time. And it wasn't sad. It was just old. And, but, these things he had picked up, obviously, in his travels with Perlman and then upstairs with his drawing desk and the barber chair. Yeah. And the desk had been cut on so much that it looked like some sort of rare tropical wood, with grain, but it was just striations from the X-Acto knife that he had been cutting on.
Well, I always tell the weird story of Bill Griffith's drawing table, where apparently Bill has been flicking ink off a nib for decades, to the point at which there's a three-dimensional mound of ink at this one little spot on the table. Because he was showing me the drawing table we're looking at. I'm like, that's a pyramid of ink. He's like, yeah, he just flicks the nib, and over 30 years with the same drawing table, that kind of adds up.
Have you been to the Billy Ireland Museum?
Yeah.
So you went there. They have Chester Gould's drawing desk, and evidently they
did it have bullet holes in it or anything?
yeah, exactly. The sculpted three-dimensional bullet hole. But they had it. They thought it was ink on the surface, but evidently he used to light a match to dry stuff and put the match
sulfur
out. Yeah, my mother was roomed with Jeannie Gould, his daughter, at the Three Arts Club in Chicago when she went to school. I have a nice little original Chester Gould drawing that he did of Dick Tracy and Jr. for my mother. It's really great.
Do you put Gould in the Pantheon?
Until about 1950.
Okay. Like the Charles Schultz level.
Yeah.
Okay.
After 1950, when he started going to the moon and stuff.
Yeah, well. Yeah.
And that also puts, it's almost like if the artist dies, if the creator dies, you should just kill the strip.
Yeah.
But that Dick Tracy thing was dying before he died.
Right.
That's because you look at the Whitman books from the 40s, just great stuff.
Drew Friedman asked me to ask you about your dad directing a film for Rodney Dangerfield, or being asked to direct a film for Rodney Dangerfield.
That's interesting.
And what happened?
Yeah, that he was working with a guy named Pat Kelly, who was the copywriter on the Federal Express spots, and somehow, I don't know what the circumstances were in terms of how the film got started, but my father was supposed to direct Easy Money.
Sorry.
And he was involved with Rodney. He'd come in, this is in the early 80s, he was coming into New York, not only because he used to love to cast in New York as well. But they'd have, script and story meetings when he was here. And then ultimately what ended up happening is my father wasn't a producer. My father was going to be the director, and my father, I don't think, had any, ownership or participation. Rodney owned everything. So at some point, the direction my father wanted to take it wasn't the direction that Rodney wanted to take it. So my father ended up not directing the film. What's interesting is the person who did direct the film is a guy named Jim Signorelli. Jim was from the beginning, was the guy who was the producer and usually the director of all the commercial parodies on SNL. Jim's been a friend of mine since 86 and was really the one who hooked me up with Smigel. Because the very first thing we did for SNL, and the way I met Robert, was doing a live action commercial parody that had an animated mascot clucking chicken.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm still in touch with Jim. But yeah, that's it. Just, my father didn't own the thing. So
yeah.
Rodney did.
You figure with Drew, there's going to be some old time comedy connection to
yeah,
everything.
Exactly. Oh, that's interesting.
Your first Mad Magazine experience? Do you remember having your brain blown off by?
Of course. I'd like to think it's truly a unique circumstance for people my age to have had Three Stooges, Mad Magazine, National Lampoon, SNL.
That's an insane run of
rated tightly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that many generations have had that. And I really think, I still have all my Mad paperbacks. And actually, the very first time I met Karen Green, the thing that we had in common was that we both had taken a Mad paperback from like our neighborhood drugstore. And, and I still have all my Mad magazines and my National Lampoons down there. And
so you didn't screw the same maitre d' like we never.
Not that I remember, right? No, Mad is so, and the guy named Bob Surratt in Chicago interviewed me, and he was the one who made me aware of that. He said, your stuff, it has this sensibility that, the same sensibility I get from Mad Magazine. And the timing and, oh God, throughout the 60s, and it wasn't, I've since, learned about Kurtzman. I didn't know who Harvey Kurtzman was. But I was just fine with, Don Martin and, Mort Drucker and all the people who were doing Mad throughout the 60s. I actually took my portfolio to Mad Magazine. They promptly threw it in the garbage, ceremoniously threw it in the garbage, but I got to go through their files and I got to just hang out in the office for a while. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful.
At the society event for Drew Friedman, again, a year or so ago for that Heroes of the Comics thing. And all of the Mad alumni got together for a photo before Al Jaffe had to leave early from the party, though. As long as Al's here, let's get everybody who's a Mad Magazine veteran and get a picture together. And it's one of those.
Al, God.
Yeah.
Oh, that so wonderful getting to know Al and work with Al. What a sweet, sweet guy.
Yeah.
And is able to just I don't think he's capable of a negative remark about anybody.
I'll tell you, I met him at that event, introduced myself, pitched him on the show. We said, sometime in the future. I'm a little busy right now. I said, well, obviously you got to make up for lost time. At 96, you still got to crank out work. But I walked away and a guy came up to me. He's like, is that Al Jaffe? I said, yeah. He's like, that guy set my level of humor for my entire life because of Mad Magazine. I said, go over there and tell him this. I know he's probably heard it a million times, but I'm also sure it still means a lot to him to hear, grown people saying, yes, thank you for, giving me the sense of humor that I have.
He was one of the people too who thought, now JJ, I don't know that I could do all this drawing. And I said, no, you just work the way you want to work. And that was the other thing that was nice about the Ford Spot. It's the first time in a long time that I actually got tangible artwork from the artist. I got watercolor from MK Brown. I got Al's drawing on tracing paper that he likes to work on for the, and to work with them on these different ideas and break down the storyboards and all that. Oh, just great. And the fact that they're happy, too, ultimately, is kind of nice.
I don't mean it in a bad way, but is there a sense of the, I don't want to say patron, but, being able to financially support artists whose work you've loved, giving them, a project like this? I know Al's had work for 50 plus years, but.
Oh, no, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And
getting back to the art versus commerce thing at the very beginning.
Well, you know what? Yeah. Also, I get the impression that they would do it for free if it got down to that. Fortunately, haven't had to do that. And actually, the first SNL cartoon we did, was with Barry, was a Larry King thing. And my idea was, oh, this is going to be great. I get these cartoons and, each one I can like get Barry Blitt to do one. I get Steve Brodner to do one. Well, it soon became obvious that to have to use an outside designer, both financially,
setting it up each time,
logistically, just procedurally, forget it. And that's how that whole inadequate drawing style evolved. It was just doing everything in the studio as quickly as you could do it. And I'd like to say I knew ahead of time and it was all preconceived, but no, that awkward, wrong discomfort you have when you watch the things, it comes from
the physical process of making it.
Yeah. And it adds to the feeling and the success of the cartoons, I think, because it looks just so raw. It's just so, and then, Smigel and whoever else he pulled in for the writing, it was just real. It was great because there wasn't anything like that before that.
Last question, sort of. White Plains? I'm just gesturing with I'm from northern New Jersey, so I'm out in the wilds too.
Well, I had worked in the city all these years. We lived, Patrice and I initially lived in Park Slope in Brooklyn. When we decided we wanted to have kids, we moved to Scarsdale. We had been in Scarsdale for 3 years when my stay and my tenure or whatever at the ink tank was just, it was time for us to open our own place. And White Plains was the biggest place we could find. We had express trains. It was reverse commuting. It was also, this place was beat to shit when we started the studio. There was cheap real estate, cheap rental. There were signs, all over the place saying things like, soon to be this skyscraper, construction starting 1983, just weathered, it was just really sad, but it was great. And I know there were a lot of people who came up to work at the studio were going, whoa, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
But that's, the work was good enough where and there were people coming in from like Jersey City, and that's like 3 different commutes. Yeah. But that's why, because we lived up here. Mm-hmm. And we didn't need to be in the midst of stuff, and we didn't need to deal with the hassle. And look, the weight on Patrice's shoulders running a studio, the other side of the brain aspect of the studio, there was no way she was going to be able to do that if we were in the city. It was a much simpler existence. And this space up here is how we started the studio. Initially, she and I shared a office on the other side. We had a reception room, and then this was the production room. That was the editing room. Mm-hmm. And then we expanded to the 10th floor. And then through the years, we kind of distilled back to this since we're all freelance. So it was easy. And we had fax machines, which saved our ass. There was no internet, but we could send things with faxes. Yeah. And when we were working on Beavis, I dreaded going by the fax room because it was on that roll paper, that heat sensitive stuff. And I knew what the notes were going to be. There were problems when the paper was rolling out onto the floor into the reception room.
Again, these are things that those damn kids today, they're just never going to know this stuff.
Yeah, right.
Real last question comes from MK Brown.
Ooh.
What's your favorite color and why?
What's my favorite color and why? My favorite color is blue. My favorite Y is the one on the corner of Grove and Maple in Evanston. The same one that Tina Fey worked at, as a matter of fact.
Very nice.
Yeah.
JJ Settlemyer, thanks so much for coming on the show.
I'm glad to have you here.
And that was JJ Settlemyer. You can find out all about his work at jjsettlemaier.com. And that's JJSedelmaier.com. JJSettlemyer.com. He's on Twitter at JJ Settlemyer, spelled the same way, and you can find him and his production company on Facebook by searching there. He's done a ton of great work for decades, and I talked about a lot of those in his bio, and we got into a bunch of them in this conversation. So I hope you get an idea of the impact that his studio has had in animation, in pop culture, and advertising. He's really an important figure, I think. Also, if you have never watched the Captain Linger short cartoons, please search on YouTube for those. You will probably bust out laughing as much as I did over the sheer awkwardness of Captain Linger, the superhero. Anyway, once we wrapped up the main session, I asked JJ, so, who you reading? And if you want to hear his answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. The newest episode of that one just went live last week, and it features 40 minutes of new material from Dave McKean, Paul Karasik, Mark Newgarden, Seymour Quast, John Leland, Ann Hulbert, Henry Wessels, Lauren Weinstein, Jerry Beck, Willard Spiegelman, Levi Tadar, Jesse Scheidlauer, and Robert Weil. You can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my new secret project that, I'll be honest, my father's health has really, really derailed me from because of all the anxiety and trepidation I have, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. We recorded this episode at JJ's office in White Plains, New York. The toll at the Tappan Zee Bridge was like $5, and parking was another $3. Oh, plus I bought a strawberry rhubarb pie at Auntie L's in Tuxedo, New York, which was around $10. JJ made coffee. If you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, pie, or just toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. Special thanks go out to John Wendler, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Stephen Nadler, Wallace Wilde Minozzi, Noah Van Sciver, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Garrett Zecker, Craig P. Steffen, Jack Lescamella, Joe Caruso, Paul Karasik, and Michael Janizik for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. Next week's guest will probably be Roz Chast from our live session at the Mocha Festival last month, where I accidentally or inadvertently met JJ. There's a chance the episode will be with Ilana Meyer instead. She's the author of the new novel Fire Dance, and we're supposed to record next weekend. Or might be with Christopher Brown, author of the really neat novel Tropic of Kansas, but it'll probably be Roz. Until then, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube and tunein.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please go to the iTunes Store, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. That'll help us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.